ماشي يا جماعة. Today we'll start with a new chapter, chapter number 4. In this chapter we are going to discuss personality and values. Okay. Of course, personality and values, it is one of the individual dynamics when we talk about organizational behavior. The main topics that we are going to discuss in this chapter, of course, mainly we are going to discuss part of the chapter is discussing issues related to personality, and the second part of the chapter is we are going to in the second part of the chapter we are going to discuss values. Okay. Now, of course, personality, we need to understand what are the main concepts of personality, definitions, of course, and so on. We need to know some of the tools which is used in order to evaluate personality, like the MBTI test, and in addition, of course, to other tools that might be used, like the Big Five personality model. Of course, we need to discuss what are the traits. When we talk about personality, we must understand what is personality trait. Of course, those are some of the most important issues when we talk about personality. In addition to that, we need to define values, understand what are the values, how values are going to affect individuals' behavior within the organization, and so on. So mainly we are going to discuss issues again. Some of those issues are related to personality, and there are other issues which is related to values. Of course, all those we are going to discuss how it is going to affect individuals' behavior within the organization. That's why we are going to study. That's why we are going to study personality and values. Now, let us start with personality. Always we say that each individual has his or her own personality. And usually we say that people, their personalities are different from each other. Why we say this is some sort of a common statement that we always use, that people are different, their personality are different. Even when we talk about brothers or sisters within the same house, we say that sometimes they are different from each other. Why? Why people are different in their personalities? Yes?
I think because everyone sees the thing or the issue from his point of view. So he feels something and acts toward this thing. So reactions may differ from someone to another because he feels or he thinks differently for this.
Okay, but when you talk about how people act or react to things, here we are talking maybe about something which is determined by personality, but it is not a description for the, we do not describe the personality according to how people act. People act according to their personalities. What else? Any more ideas? Yes? Okay, so when we talk about the components of personality, here we are talking about different components. Of course, each of us have a lot of components. Some of those components might match with others, or for sure it is going to match with others, but at the same time there are other components which is going to be different. I mean here, comparing those components to other people, even if those people are living in the same house. Okay. Now, this should help us in how to define personality. Okay. When you talk about personality, let us use first simple words, and then we can go through the definitions. Okay. Now, when you talk about personality, here in personality we are talking about what are the personality is a package of components. Of course, those components we call it traits. Okay. Now, those traits shape the personality of each individual. Okay. And people, according to those traits, they are going to behave. or they are going to react according to different situations that they face. Okay, so when you talk about personality, again, let us use here simple words. Okay, we are talking about a package of components. In between brackets, those components we call it traits. Okay, now those, according to those traits or according to this package, people react to different events or situations and so on. Now, one of the first definitions about personality was developed by Gordon Alpert. It is more than 70 or maybe 80 years old. It is one of the most it is maybe the first professional definition about personality. According to Alpert, he defined personality as it is a system or organizational system within individual. Okay, so here when we talk about organizational system within individual, we are talking about a lot of components which is integrated together and shaping something. This something, of course, it is personality. Okay, so when you talk about the individual organizational system of course, different individuals here, we are talking about the components of personality. Okay, now those organizational dynamics, or it is shaping some sort of a psychological system which is related to behavior and how people are reacting to different situations. So we have some dynamics which is organized, or in other words, again, it is some sort of system. When we talk about system here, we are talking about components which is integrated together. Okay, now those, or this integration is going to affect how people are going to react to different situations that they face. Okay, now those components, they are going to shape the personality, and again, according to personality, we adjust to our environment. What we mean here by adjustment to environment is how individuals are reacting to different situations that they face. In a certain situation, they are going to behave in a certain way. Maybe in different situations, they are going to behave in different way, and so on. Okay, now a more simple definition. We are talking here about how people, some people, they define personality as how people react and interact with others. Okay, it is related, of course, to the same idea here, which is how people adjust to the environment. When you talk about the environment, we face situations. So many of those situations, we are involved with others in a certain circumstances. We need to decide how to behave, how to react, interact, and so on. So here we are talking about how people act and react with others, or how they interact with others. Okay, another idea here or concept which is related to also how some people define personality. Here we are talking about the measurable traits a person exhibits. And that's why I said when you talk about personality using simple words, we are talking here about a package of components. Those components, we call it traits. Okay, now those traits are going to make us behave in a certain way according to different situations that we face. Okay, so one more time again, when you talk about personality, we are talking here about package of components, which is traits here, which is going to shape our personality, and according to our personality, we are going to behave or interact in a certain way. Now, that's why at the beginning I asked why people, their personalities are different, because those components are not the same. Some of those components overlap or match between one individual and another, but it is not totally the same. It is almost impossible to find two individuals have the same traits or the same personality at the end, of course, or they are having the same characteristics. So that's why people are different. Okay, this is one of the most important reasons, because in their personality, they are different from each other. Though some individuals, they might share more traits, okay, and others they might share less traits, but again, it is difficult, almost impossible again, to find two individuals have exactly the same traits or personal characteristics. Okay. Now, when you talk about organizational behavior, sometimes it is important to measure personality. Before discussing how to measure personality, why it is important to measure personality? Yes?
It's important for manager to measure it because it's useful in decision making and also to know the personalities of employees and to put them in the right place, put the right person in the right place and in the right time.
Okay. What else? Yes?
To know how the person will deal or will handle with the risk or the activities that face on the situation in the organization.
Okay. Yes?
Of course, measuring personality is very beneficial to managers as they can determine who's the best for the job. Also, being informed about the different personalities of employees help them to better understand and effectively manage those employees according to their different personalities.
Oh, now let us talk about all those ideas. Okay, when you talk about organizations or firms, we have managers, we have subordinates, and so on. Okay, there are people working in the organization. Now, when we think about how management should work or how management should deal with employees, here we are talking about continuous interaction. There should be some sort of continuous communication between managers and employees and so on. Okay, we need to motivate employees. How can we motivate employees if we do not know how they think, how they are going to react, or and so on? Okay, we need in some cases to assign them to do something which is related to work. We must find out whether this thing is matching or coping with their personality or not. So here again we are talking about interacting with others. We are talking about different managerial levels within the organization interacting with others. In order to effectively manage employees, one of the most important things that we need to understand about employees is what are their personalities. Okay, this is going to make managing employees much more easier. It is going to reduce mistakes. It is going to reduce problems and so on. Of course, when you talk about reducing mistakes and problems, we are talking about different phases. One of those phases is related, for example, to the employment phase or stage. When we talk about selection, even before employing employees, before selecting employees, okay, during recruitment and so on, sometimes we need here to find out whether this employee is going to fit within the organization or not. So in such cases, we need to do some tests, which we call personality tests here. We use it in the selection phase, okay, in order to judge whether this candidate is suitable for the organization or not, whether this candidate is going to fit best with other employees or not, and so on, okay. In addition to that, sometimes it is important maybe that employees themselves, they should understand about their own personality. Like the assignment you were asked to do about assessing your attitudes or evaluating your attitudes. And there is another assignment that you are going to do which is related to values. There is other tests which is related to evaluating personality, okay? And we are going to go through some of those tests and discuss those tests and understand about it, okay? Now, such tests, it's going to help employees to understand more themselves, to understand what are their personality, what are their preferences, what are their personal traits, and so on, okay? At the same time also, sometimes maybe managers need to evaluate employees' personalities. So they are going to use other tools. Now, when we talk about how to measure personalities, here there are 3 types of tests. We are talking here about categories. Okay? Some of those tests are designed in order to evaluate personality in general, and those are mostly used when we talk about selecting new employees. So it is more helpful when we talk about hiring employees. Okay? So we use it in testing candidates, applying for the job, and so on. there are self-report surveys which is used by individuals. Okay, here individuals, they evaluate themselves, and it is one of the most common methods. If you search on the net, you are going to find maybe thousands of those tests with key solutions and interpretation for the results and so on. Okay. Also, there is observer rating surveys. It is other tools, but usually those tools are used by others. So maybe how questions are asked, maybe it is different, it is going to be different. The design of those tools, it might be different. But at the same time here we are talking either about questionnaires or interviews or checklists. But the components, here we are talking about questions or items which is designed in order to assess or evaluate personality. So again, why it is important to evaluate personality? It is important to facilitate how employees within the organization in general, they are going to interact with each other. And most important here, maybe how management is going to interact with employees. Also, if we need to think in a more practical manner, also employees, it is important maybe for them to understand what is the personality of their managers. This is going to help lower level staff to deal in more comfortable environment with their supervisors, with less problems, of course, and so on. Okay, any questions till now? Let us continue. Now, still, of course, we are talking about personality. Okay, we need to understand what are personality determinants. Okay, we said that there are components, there are the personal traits, okay, but how those traits are developed. Yes, what are the determinants of personality?
It's contained from heredity, which is the things which you take taken from parents to their children, and also the environmental factors. And most studies said that the heredity is more than the environment factors. It's related to genes and something like that.
Okay. Let's step by step. Okay. Now, when you talk about the components, one of the most important components is heredity, in addition to environmental factors. Okay. Of course, the personal traits that we have said, of course, it is another issue. But the personal traits, either they are going to be developed through heredity or environmental factors and so on. Okay. When you talk about heredity, now there are maybe two interpretation of the meaning of heredity. The one which we are going to follow here, which is used in the textbook that we are studying, is relating heredity to something which is related to genetic development and so on. So we are talking here about some genes which is transferred through parents to children and so on. Okay. Now this is part of the determinants. Okay. Now the other part of the determinants is related to environmental factors. When you talk about environmental factors, give me some examples here. Yes.
The cultural factors, situational factors. The cultural factors, for example, each culture expects and trains its members to behave in certain ways according to their traditions, customs. Also, the situational factors assumes that the individual's personality doesn't change according to different situations. For example, the arrogant person maybe become humble in a particular situation.
Okay. What else? In addition to cultural factors.
I think there's the social factors, because people are living in an environment with people, with other people, so he interacts with them, and it affects him much because he sees how he faces situations and events, and he interacts with this, and so he learned how to interact with every situation he faces.
Okay, and when you talk about the social factor here, it's not only the community or the society, even when you talk about the smaller society, if I may say here, which is the family. So when you talk about the family, there is something which is related to heredity, like when we talk about those genes and so on, okay? And there is something which is related to how parents raise their children and so on, okay? So how parents are raising their children, this is related to environment. It is not related to heredity, okay? So when you talk about heredity more, we are talking about something that is uncontrollable. Something is by nature, okay? But when you talk about environmental factors here, we are talking about some sort of influence, which is which happen through time, okay? Like if we are talking about the family as the smaller social unit, or if we are talking about the society in general, the community, or if we are talking about the cultural impact or influence, or even if we are talking about education and learning and so on. This is one of the determinants also of personality, okay? Now, this should lead us to discuss the issue whether or up to what extent personality is changeable.
From what you just mentioned, that heredity is something uncontrollable, unlike the situational factors that affect the person in one way or another. So I believe that people do change, but the change process takes time according to the behavior itself. I mean, there are behaviors that are routine and they are regular, so I think these behaviors are harder to change. But there are specific behaviors that are...
Exactly. Sometimes things become like habits, where people are used to do it, and sometimes even spontaneously they are doing such activities. Okay, so in some cases it is difficult to change, in other cases it might be easier. But when we compare personality to other dynamics of individual behavior, okay, maybe changing values is very difficult, which we are going to study later, but comparing, for example, personality to attitudes, maybe personality is more difficult to change than attitudes, or in other words, attitudes are easier. When you talk about perception, maybe perception is easier to change. So it's all changeable. But when you talk about the difficulty in, about this change or to bring the change and so on, there are different difficulty levels here between all those individual dynamics of or dynamics of individual behavior. Okay. Now, so again, personality, it can be changed. Now, what are the main determinants? One of the most important determinants is heredity. Okay, and like what? Give me some examples about heredity, how some personal traits which is related to heredity, others than those which is mentioned here.
For example, like hair and color of eyes.
Okay, but this is not related to personality. It is more related to physical structure or what else? Yes.
Being nervous or stubborn.
For example, okay. But sometimes people, they are patient more than others, okay? Or the opposite if they are nervous and so on, yes?
Like honesty.
For example. But now, what we need to... now, that's why I asked, okay? So many of those traits, also when you talk about environmental factors, it influences those traits a lot, okay? Now, there is some sort of overlapping here when you talk about how those traits are developed, okay? True, heredity play an important role, okay? But with time, social influences, cultural influences, education, learning, and so on, it might change a lot of those traits, okay? Or for sure, it is going to change a lot of those traits. Not necessarily changing those traits, bringing an opposite trait. It might be up to what extent the degree of the trait itself. Okay, if we are talking about a level, maybe there is going to be some sort of increase or decrease in the level of the trait itself. So when you talk about heredity, we are not talking about an absolute determinant which is totally unchangeable. No, we are talking about an important determinant, but with time there are a lot of influences that might influence those factors, and it might change those factors also, okay? But again, a lot of researchers prove that heredity is very important. A lot of researchers, you are going to find some of those mentioned in the textbook, mentioned some identical twins who were separated, and after sometimes they have conducted some researches about those twins, they find a lot of similarities between those twins. At the same time, they find a lot of strange things. Some separated twins, they used to go to similar places and have same habits, and even sometimes they used to spend their vacations in the same city without knowing each other, and without knowing that the other twin is there, and so on. So research have proved that there is a lot of influence when you talk about heredity. But research also proved that those elements are changeable. When you talk about the environmental influence, with time, those traits or those elements can be changed through influences, again, of cultural influences, social influences, learning, and so on. Okay? Okay, this is one of the issues. Now, here between heredity and environment, okay, the personality traits are going to be developed. Okay, what is personality trait? What is personality trait?
Enduring characteristic which describe the individual.
Which means? Okay, at the beginning of the lecture, I said that people are different from each other and they have different characteristics. Those characteristics, we call it traits, okay? Now, but it is some sort of terminology. We say that those are personality traits. Now, those personality traits, it is the characteristics that each individual has, okay? And we said that those characteristics or traits are different from one individual to another, though sometimes, or in most cases, there is some sort of overlapping, but we are not talking about identical or typical characteristics or traits. What is the importance of those traits, personality traits? What is the importance of personality traits?
I think those traits are the ones who are affecting how the person feels and how he interacts with the situations he faces. So it controls how you interact with the situations.
Okay. What else? True. Because this how we defined also personality. We say how people act and interact with others. People are going to act and interact according to their personal traits. Again, more ideas.
Well, I think that they don't only affect the behaviors, but also affect the mentality of the individual himself.
Affect, sorry?
The mentality.
Okay.
As for the way he thinks, the way he wants to be, many people will turn to be, for example, successful or have, aspirations for the future, but others think mostly about things relating to their future, to what they want to do, to their interaction with people, as she just mentioned, to learning, the importance of things.
Okay, most ideas that you have brought till now, it is related to what is the impact of personality, or what is the role of personality, which is related to behavior, acting, interacting, adjusting to the environment. Okay, this we agree on. But there is another side of this issue. Okay, you know the code bar, which is available on commodities and things and so on. Okay, usually if you go to any supermarket, if you go to hypermarket, whatever, all those code bars are different from one thing to, or from one commodity to another. And the same when you talk about personality. Personality, let me use my own words here. It is like a code bar for each individual, okay, which is going to differentiate this individual from others. We said that each one has his own personality, okay. So now when we talk about those traits, and characteristics and so on, it is what is going to differentiate one individual from another. And when you talk about business environment, this is important because people have different characteristics. This means that people, what they can do and what they can do is going to be different from one individual to another. One of the determinants here is, of course, personality. So when you talk about those traits and characteristics, in addition that it is going to help people to adjust to different environmental situations, and in addition to that, those traits are going to identify how people are going to react and interact with others, etc. Also, those traits are going to differentiate one individual from another because each individual has his or her own traits or characteristics. Okay, any questions؟ كيف اليوم؟ يعطيكم العافية.